This is Football at 4.
Last year, this time, we were talking about this Eagles defense like they were arguably the worst in the NFL. Honestly, some of the worst tape I saw was the Eagles defense at the end of last season. So to see the way they're tackling, the soundness of the coverage, the linebacker play they've been getting, and then, of course, all these young defenders from Jalen Carter to Cooper DeJean to Quinion Mitchell playing at such a high level, it makes me view this team as a legitimate contender because of how balanced they are.
Mina Kimes said that here on the Sports Bash Live. It's Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher is our guest today for today's Football at 4, and he joins us on a Sports Bash Monday. No Birds yesterday, Jeff, but plenty of football to kind of tie into everything. But as Mina Kimes said, is the difference in the belief of this team, does it lie on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it is funny. I made a remark in the postgame show that who would have thought 11 weeks into the season it would be the defense that was carrying the offense, because the defense is now more consistent than the offense is. I mean, certainly the offense is explosive and has all the stars on that side of the ball, but the defense really has been, I think, kind of the glue. It's allowed the Eagles to have some uneven offensive showings at times, whether it was the first half Dallas, first half Washington, other games, but then still be in the game. And then when the offense figures it out and starts scoring and all of a sudden it looks lopsided, you forget, well, that was the defense that was really helping it and keeping the offense at bay. So I do think the defense has sort of provided that foundation for the team in a surprising way. And, you know, the next 3, 4, or 5 weeks we'll continue to test just how good it is. But, yeah, it served as a spark plug and a little bit of a glue to what the team is right now.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because Sirianni was asked about the linebackers today and, you know, kind of like, you know, what role these linebackers have. I think you take a look at Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean. How have you kind of seen them blossom and grow? I mean, I think we had questions about Dean. There were so many comments about him. Man, he was the best guy in training camp. That was clear. And then he kind of stumbled out of the gate, and we're like, But how much of those two guys grown and kind of added some validity to this defense?
Yeah, I mean, they're limiting their mistakes, and then they're making far more positive plays than negative plays. And Vic has done a good job of also, you know, making sure he's catering his play calls to their strengths. I think in a case like Vaughn, who'd never played the position. Hey, did you know Zach Bond never played inside linebacker? Have we beat that to death enough this year? In that case, though,
and Jeff, who gets credit for finding him?
I don't know, man. Let's do a story on that. I heard Vic was really it was Vic's idea. But if you go back to the Falcons game, I think was week 2, right? And he struggled in that game from a key and diagnose standpoint, meaning there were times where Chris Lindstrom, the right guard, would just jump out and cut him at his ankles, right, and have him on the ground, and that would pave the way for some big gains by the running backs, by Bijan Robinson and Algier. And that's, to me, that's an experience thing where you haven't seen that, you haven't played the position much, and once you see it, you start to learn. And to me, that's Vaughn right now. He saw a lot of things the first few weeks, and he's been coached up, and now he's keying and diagnosing really well. And getting better in that perspective each week. And then Nakobe, I think Nakobe has just had, you know, not starting all last year. He has the instinct of a linebacker. He's played it his whole life. He's a good downhill linebacker, and Vic does a good job of getting him in situations where he's downhill. He made a really nice tackle on Jaden Daniels in the first half of that game when Daniels scrambled up the middle, and that's tough to do. It's open field, but that's where Nakobe has always functioned pretty well going downhill. In space, both of them can still get a little bit, I don't want to say lost, but out of their comfort zone. And you saw that Austin Eckler had 8 catches for 80 yards, was it, or 81 yards against the Eagles. So they did some things with 2 back formations, pony formations, that made it confusing for the linebackers to know where the running backs were going to be, especially in coverage. So you'll probably see that going forward, them trying to take advantage of that. But again, nobody's asking these guys to be perfect. It's just limiting mistakes. And for the most part, those guys have made very, very few mistakes.
Yeah, this defense is interesting because would you when you watch them, okay, and they match up against a good defense, are you confident that, yeah, they're a good offense, that the best offense I guess they've played is Cincinnati, and they really did a good job that game. So is that enough for us to start to say if they play a Detroit or I don't even know what other team has an offense that gives you some concern, but do we feel that they have three levels, a guy on the defensive front, the linebackers, and then that secondary, that they are solid enough that they should not be a worry even against a good offense?
Yes and no. There's no perfect defenses out there, even some of the good ones. Kansas City has a great defense, right? They've been a defensive team, but obviously they didn't play great defense against the Bills. So I can't sit here and tell you that if the Eagles play the Lions, they're going to hold them to 15, 17 points, or even the Rams next week or whatever. I just think that from a standpoint of I expect this Eagles defense to not make bad mistakes, not to fall victim to motion and misdirection like last year, not to have communication breakdowns. I expect them to play solid and steady. Now, sometimes you're going to go up against a team that has really incredible talent on the offensive side. The Lions would be one of those teams. And we'll see with this Rams team that has really good talent, but is somewhat sporadic offensively week after week. So we'll see about that. The Steelers have been able to score points. I wouldn't quite say that they're magnificent offensively, but certainly the Ravens can be. I don't think the Eagles are going to hold these teams to like 7 to 10 points. I think they're going to give up points because it's the NFL, but I'd be surprised if you ran into 2 or 3 games where the Eagles just look completely lost defensively as well. I feel like there's just no shutdown defenses anymore in the NFL. There are some really good ones, the Chiefs week to week, and the Bears actually play really – I know they've had a couple of games where they've looked down, but they are a tough, hard-nosed, hit you hard, cause turnovers type defense. The Eagles, I don't know if they're at that level, but they're really good and sound and fundamental right now.
What's Quinyon Mitchell allow this team to do?
I don't know if they do anything differently, but I think his presence, his dynamic abilities, the fact that he can press and play up now, which he wasn't doing earlier in the year, I guess you could say that allows them to blitz more confidently, but it's not like Joe blitzes a whole lot anyway, and he was probably blitzing the same amount earlier in the year when they were giving up more cushion. It's just now they're able to execute what they want better, and they make quarterbacks go to different reads a little bit more frequently because of his ability to be a guy who can play really tight coverage against you.
Yeah,
when this guy starts getting his hands on the ball, Mike, more, and I think that'll come and starts becoming an interception threat. Ooh, watch out.
Well, and that's where it's funny because it doesn't seem like he's getting a lot of attention, but I think you're starting to see that nobody's throwing it at him, or he's basically shutting everybody down. And I guess if you're not a guy getting interceptions, then you don't really make a mark. But it's almost like the silence is deafening with what he's doing.
Yeah. I think for us who watch it on a game-to-game basis, and I do think the national media is starting to recognize it. I thought the broadcast crew did a good job pointing out how he's been excellent. I think so. I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but I am starting to see people recognize Quinyon Mitchell for what he's been doing. So it'll continue to come as the Eagles face more number one type wideouts. Whether it's Zay Flowers, whether it's Pickens, whether it's, take your pick between Kupp and Nakua on Sunday night, I'm sure he'll come under the microscope even more so, especially these games that are primetime games. Next Sunday's game is a primetime game. It would not shock me if that Ravens game, what time is that Ravens game? Is that 1 o'clock? It might get flexed to at least 4 if it's not already.
We were talking about this earlier. So the Eagles-Ravens game, I think, is a 4:25 game. And they play the Steelers at 4:25. So I'm wondering, we were talking about whether the Eagles-Steelers game ends up getting flexed. It is a 4:25 Fox game, but the Bills play the Lions that same day at 4:25. So the NFL might say, let's separate those two games, get one in prime time, have the other one for the national window. I just don't know which one's in the national window.
What's the Sunday night game that week? Do you know?
It's not a great game. We were talking about it earlier. Let me pull it up for you here.
Yeah, I remember looking too. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
It is. The Sunday night game is Green Bay, Seattle, and there's two Monday night games that week. You got Atlanta, Vegas, and Chicago, Minnesota.
Oh, that Atlanta Vegas is begging to be. You can flex Monday night games now, right?
You can flex the Monday night games. I just don't know what the rules are, and Fox I think can block, but I don't know who has the national window.
Yeah.
But the game that they play against Pittsburgh is 4:25, but it's up against Buffalo, Detroit. So I can see maybe whoever doesn't have that national window saying, "All right, you can take that game, and we'll," you know what I mean? I don't know who has the doubleheader that week.
To make that decision soon, though. I think you need two weeks for a Monday night game flex. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do it soon. The Eagles play Baltimore, by the way. That game is a 4:25 game, not this week. It's the following week. So I don't think that game can be flexed. And by the way, I know Romo and Nance are calling that game, so that game's not getting flexed. They're not going to give up that game.
Yeah, well, either way, when you're 4:25, you're sort of that regional game or, semi-regional game. And I imagine that with Romo there, as long as Quignon's playing well and continues to do what he's doing, he's going to get a decent amount of exposure and attention. I think he's making a bid for a Pro Bowl year here in his rookie year. We'll have to see how, the year finishes up.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, he hasn't given up a touchdown the entire season. He's only given up 50% of the passes thrown his way are being completed. But for me, Moshe, I don't know about for you, having a guy like him, and listen, he's a rookie. I don't know. Does he hit the wall? Does he start to fade a little bit? But when you have that guy in the secondary that, last week, when they played Washington, I'm thinking to myself, they have McLaurin. I'm like, okay, great. The Eagles have Mitchell. That's a wash for me. I mean, if he could go toe-to-toe with McLaurin and CeeDee Lamb, you threw out a couple guys, Zay Flowers, George Pickens. They're not on the same level as those guys.
No, but it's still, they're all, listen, Flowers is really good. Pickens is really good. I mean, they're having really good years. So, and they're different types of receivers, right? They do things differently, and they have good skill sets that are challenging. So I think that it's like you're just stacking games against guys who have really good skill sets and showing what you can do against them.
All right, I want to get some thoughts, moving forward here. Offensively, the last couple weeks of the season. This is I don't know. When I say Geoff Mosher, tell me about the Eagles' offense, and would you say, man, they're explosive, or man, there's meat on the bone here still?
Yeah, yes and yes. I thought, that was a strange first half against Washington. I thought that there were a couple of self-inflicted wounds. There were some penalties that put the Eagles behind the sticks early. They didn't run the ball great in the first half, so that kind of took away a little of bread and butter. They had two, in my opinion, drops that hurt them. The third down drop by Jahan Dotson on a slant. I know it was thrown a little behind, but you're a receiver one-on-one. I felt like he should have caught it. The Devontae Smith one on the right sideline. I know he was trying to tip that, 9 times out of 10. Devontae Smith makes that catch, right, and tiptoes the sideline, and it just didn't happen. So I know a lot of people were hard on Jalen Hurts for that first half. I don't think it was that bad, to be honest with you. And then he clearly made some plays in the second half to get that explosive element that we talked about, make some good plays with his legs and his feet.
Do you think...
I'm sorry, left feet and his arms.
I've heard a lot of people suggest that he's kind of the weak link of the offense. Would you say, yeah, I could see that? Like the offensive line, Barkley, the receivers, or is Hurts the guy that you look at and say, that's
I don't
why...
know. I feel like that's a manipulation of words. The weak link of an offense. Are we saying then that all 10 other players are better than Jalen Hurts? Because I wouldn't argue that. and listen, I've been pretty objective and critical at times of Hurts, but I think that's something like if you're a Hurts hater, you're going to say. Do I think it's a fair statement to say, hey, if he doesn't play more consistently against good teams or in the playoffs, if he has a stinker game or is off the mark, yeah, they'll lose. But that's the case with any quarterback.
Yeah, no, and listen, I guess you're looking at the big picture and just saying why, you said yes and yes. The offense has left meat on the bone, and they're explosive. And it seems that they're leaving meat on the bone. Why? And yes, they're explosive at times. It seems that when there are big plays to be made, they're making them, but not all the time. And that doesn't mean, look, every team makes big plays all the time. But for instance, if you're watching Detroit play Jacksonville yesterday, they're not leaving meat on the bone. It's 52-3.
No.
And Philadelphia is struggling to get through Jacksonville, and it seems that they left meat on the bone.
Yeah. You ever see a guy eat like chicken wings, and he just has that, or he or she just has that ability to just like spit out the bone completely dry? Like that's the Lions right now. They don't leave no meat on the bone. They're like dogs, man. Dogs attacking meat. There's nothing left. So they're on another level, and that's great. That sort of reminds me of how the Eagles were 2 years ago, but maybe even more potent than that. And not too many teams you can say are doing that. That's what's going to make them a really tough out in the playoffs. The Eagles are leaving meat on the bone at times. And yes, I think in a big game that can hurt them. But right now, when you're just trying to stack regular season wins and get your number one seed, it hasn't hurt them yet. But I do think it's fair to say, hey, look, you know what? I don't think there's any excuses for this. I know people have said, well, first year in Kellen Moore's offense, or still working with this new running back and this new – no, I think this is what the offense is. I think that this is how Jalen Hurts likes to play the game, looking for he's a big game hunter, so he's going to either not see or bypass some of the easier ones underneath, and he's going to run sometimes even though there's open receivers. I'd be very, very surprised if that element of his game, changed drastically from year to year to year.
For your money on defense, who do you think is maybe the most important player, most important part of that defense?
Wow, that's a great question. That is a really good question because I feel like they've played such great team defense. Some of the things they do from the Vic Fangio standpoint, like the match, carry, deliver principles we talk about when they're playing zone, that requires communication. There's not one person who controls all that, right? It's just the team being in sync. Jalen Carter, I guess, would be the answer, only because he has the ability to single-handedly wreck a passing game if he can play like he did against Washington, against New Orleans, and really cause turnovers and create havoc. Usually that kind of guy, either that or a cornerback or safety like C.J. Gardner-Johnson 2 years ago, is going to flip the field. But, the Eagles, they get turnovers, but they're not – I wouldn't call them a great turnover production team like they were a couple of years ago.
You wonder if they start to fall their way in the second half a little, because you're right. You're like, man, this defense has been really good, and they're not like forcing a lot of turnovers, although they've got some big interceptions. And like last week, they get the ceiling interception. They had an interception a couple times. Blankenship seems to come out with them. But you wonder, like as you kind of mentioned, once Mitchell gets his hands, are these turnovers going to start coming later on in the season?
I mean, it's possible. I think that the thing that makes you cause turnovers are, one, you either have like playmakers who have a knack for it. C.J. Gardner-Johnson 2 years ago had a great knack for it, and that was his thing. Now he had a lot in a burst there that was probably overinflated how good of a turnover guy he was, but nonetheless he did it. And then the other way is just usually by hitting quarterbacks consistently, having a guy like a Hassan Reddick or Jalen Carter who's jumping on your quarterback and cause it or batting his passes or really rushing him into some bad throws. Which the Eagles, their pass rush is not as dominant 2 years ago. It's sporadic, but it works at times. I think the coverage amazingly has actually helped the pass rush as opposed to vice versa. So I don't know if they're going to be a team that week in, week out gives you 2 to 3 turnovers, but they have the ability in any game to get the one that they need. I don't see them as a team that's going to start producing 2 to 3 a week like they were a couple of years ago.
Well, they got an interesting one on Sunday Night Football. We'll get into it more later on this week when Moshe is back. They play the Rams, as you hinted at earlier, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. Those are two shifty, quick type of receivers. We'll see what kind of matchup problems the Eagles have with those two. They got a good running game with Kyron Williams, but they're a weird team, the Rams are. It seems like they're just been very inconsistent. They've had a lot of injury issues, and we'll deal with them a little bit further down the week. But Geoff Mosher, today's Football at 4. Thank you, Moshe.
You got it, buddy. Talk to you.